Don't negotiate in fives. We like the 5%, 10%, 15% discounts. By doing that for a law firm, for every 1% additional discount you're giving your client, you're typically taking about 3 to 4% of your existing margin.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Yeah, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the lucky or maybe unlucky relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is Stuart Dodds. Here are 3 things you want to know about Stuart before we start. He's the co-founder of Positive Pricing, which is a pricing consulting firm focused on professional services firms. He's a board member of the Legal Value Network. And something unusual, he lists Coursera courses he's completed, and they aren't the types of courses you might have expected. These are history of rock, philosophy, mythology, very well-rounded person. Let's see what we can learn from Stuart. Welcome, Stuart.
Hello, Mark, and thank you for that nice introduction. And I'll see if I'm well-rounded by the end of this or not.
I'm sure you're going to do great. So how did you get into pricing?
By luck, actually. My background was always in management consulting, so business consulting. I was primarily a supply chain consultant. So I used to look after trucks and sheds and warehouses and all that good stuff. And in the late 90s, purchasing or procurement became quite a key topic. So actually I moved into supply chain, strategic procurement, e-procurement, that whole area around about 2000, and then became more passionate from the procurement side, from the negotiation, how you explain value, how you extract value. And because of my role in procurement, I actually got headhunted for a major law firm in the UK to be their global head of pricing, which at that stage was quite unusual. And I knew nothing about pricing. So I had to take my procurement knowledge, my negotiation background, and literally flip it the other way around. So I did all the things that any novice should do. I joined the Professional Pricing Society. I read up on all the books that are there, and tried to literally subsume myself into the pricing world and relate that back to what I knew, which was the procurement world. And that's how the journey started.
Nice. So I rarely have nice, positive thoughts around procurement people. So luckily you left the dark side and came and joined us on the positive side over here. So what was unusual about taking on a job at a legal firm? Why would they hire a pricing person? Because don't they just do hourly billing all the time and we got that down, it's easy?
I think that was one of the things that certainly the firm that I joined, which was a very well-known Magic Circle firm, were very passionate to try and change. I think they recognized, firstly, the impact that pricing had on their bottom line, and had been looking at a way to try and work out what to do. When I joined, it was 2008. It was actually just before the global financial crisis. So it was either great planning on my part or very bad planning on my part. But it meant that a lot of doors that would have been shut were now immediately open because people were wanting help and support. They needed to understand how do they deal with this, actually, ironically, current market situation, 2008 and also 2020. And what they were trying to do was actually change the way that they engage with their clients. So they wanted to give greater certainty, they wanted to price accordingly. And although the traditional way of doing that was hourly rates, and for many professional services, that still has a role to play, they were trying to do something different, and they needed to have a focal point or a resource or resources to help coordinate and train and educate and have those client-facing conversations with the procurement teams, with the dark side, from somebody who actually understood why the dark side were asking that question.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to call it the dark side now. That's good.
I've probably lost all my procurement friends that I ever had. So I just want to say to them, if they're listening, I apologize in advance.
Nice. Let's talk a little bit about pricing professional services. So obviously, law firms are professional services. What else do you think of when you think of professional services?
I mean, for me, obviously I came from a consulting background, and actually coming from a procurement background or procurement consultancy firm laterally, we used a lot of the pricing approaches that are second nature outside of professional services. So we use things to do with, value or risk sharing mechanisms. We had blended rates. We had different entry levels of differentiated pricing depending on the type of work and the value of the work. And I thought I was coming into, when I joined legal, an industry that was more used to doing that, because I'd seen it in my consulting world. And obviously we had fixed fees, we had cap fees, all these types of things. Having spoken to a number of accountancy firms and engineering firms and actuarial firms and advertising firms, there's a tendency still to go back to that hourly rate and not explore different ways of delivering better value to their clients, and not actually getting better pricing and better profitability for them as an organization. It's still relatively naive or immature in many sectors. And actually, ironically, having joined the legal sector from consulting, the legal sector of all of them has actually probably embraced the concept of having pricing professionals much more actively within their own organizations. I don't mean consulting to other organizations, but within their own firms, because they see the value of it. So, when I joined the pricing community in 2008, there were 2 people in law firms that did the role that I was doing. There are now over 400. So it's actually one of the fastest growing professional areas within the legal services. We're now seeing that replicated in accountancy firms, and we're beginning to see that replicated in other professional service firms as well.
Yeah, why do you think it works? Why do you think it takes off in legal more so than, say, accounting firms?
I think partly it's the fact that it's maybe had a slightly longer heritage in legal. I mean, 2008, I know is not that long ago in real terms, but I think the fact that those organizations were seeing a benefit from having those types of roles in place, and having a relatively small group, as indeed accountants, a relatively small group of individuals who could see the value of what was being delivered and were hearing about it in either podcasts or magazine articles or whatever that would be. I think, although a lot of people, and certainly in the accountancy profession, have been doing this, and obviously Ron Baker came from the accountancy profession, he's got great perspectives. I think certainly some of the organizations themselves have been a little bit reluctant to have somebody who's maybe not a fee earner helping provide that professional support and that advice and that guidance and coaching, because they think that they can do it. So I think there's a number of different elements, and culture is actually often one, whether it be law firms or not. Actually, many law firms have tried having a pricing person, but if they're not letting that person have a role to play in the conversations, particularly with the clients, the value of the role is diminished significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was thinking about the answer to the question that I asked, a few things came to mind. First thing that comes to mind is lawyers probably deliver a lot more value than they actually get paid for. Where I'm not 100% sure that's true with accountants. And I say that in the following sense. I often teach a concept of will I and which one, meaning how much competition is there. And if I'm trying to get my books done, I can go to almost any accountant or bookkeeper and get my books done, because it's a pretty solid, well-known road. Where if I've got a legal problem, it's almost different every time. So it isn't the same thing, unless I'm just going to do a deed or a real estate transaction or something like that. And so I could see how lawyers have less competition, which means that people would probably be willing to pay more, which means that they're leaving more money on the table when they do hourly billing. Did that resonate with you at all?
Elements do, but not everything. I think partly, if I was to speak to lawyers, and I did this morning in the UK, have a chat with a well-known firm, one of the challenges that they have is they feel the opposite. They feel that actually many of the services that they're providing are highly competitive. Now, there's a distinction here between, is it competitive on price or is it competitive on something else? And actually, the default for a lawyer typically is it's price related, therefore I need to discount, which is actually the thing we try and educate more generally away from.
Right.
But I also think that there are certain things that a lawyer does, as indeed there are certain things that an accountant or another professional service provider does that are very, very high end. It's the bet the company type things, it's the reputational type things. But there's a lot of stuff there that is also the run the business type stuff and the commodity type stuff. And no lawyer certainly likes to hear the word commodity, but if there are 3 or 4 people, very much like your example of bookkeeping, if there are 3 or 4 people who can do it at a relatively similar level, it's a commodity. So I think one of the challenges that law firms are having at the moment is identifying why it's them, what's their differentiator, what's their value add, why can they be charging more for certain services, and how should they best support delivery of the other less differentiated services to their client base in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about going to the car shop for a second. This whole thing of hourly pricing versus project pricing, or solution pricing struck home for me one day when I was in a car shop, and I saw a sign that said you could replace your battery for $149 or something like that. And it suddenly hit me, you know what they don't say is you can buy a battery and pay us an hourly rate to replace your battery. It was, here's 149 bucks, we're going to replace your battery.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if I go in there and I say, you know, my engine's making this little tinging sound, can you fix that? They're not going to give me a flat fee to fix the tinging sound because they have absolutely no idea what that is. And so it seems to me when I think about this whole hourly versus project, it has a lot to do with how certain am I that I know the solution to the problem.
I think that's very fair. And actually, one of the things that I've seen in many of the conversations that I've had with my peers and with clients as well, both when I was in law firms and outside now, is a lot of it is down to how do I deal with the uncertainty? So how do I actually know that I've understood the problem correctly? And often the client, particularly in a legal context, but not solely in a legal context, maybe doesn't understand the problem themselves. And it's having that dialogue and that conversation. And one of the key challenges, I think, in most professional services is that the nature of the people who are successful there have very strong opinions. They have lots of good examples and they've got lots of brain power and grey cells that they're expediting or are using. But what the challenge is that also means they're typically not listening to the answers or they're not asking the right questions. And one of the things we've seen a huge movement to, certainly in legal and also in some of the other areas, is actually being willing to sit down to the client and say, I think it's this option, but I'm not sure. Let's explore this a bit more and let's find a pricing mechanism that works in this situation. So if it's something that is pretty easy to scope, pretty easy to define, pretty repeatable, well, that's one option. But if it's less obvious, are there ways that we can get rid of that ambiguity? Can we use assumptions more effectively? And lawyers love assumptions, but the problem is lawyers love too many assumptions. They love 15, 20 assumptions. Best practice, guess what? It's 3 or 4. And they find that very difficult because that means that they feel they're taking on a risk. But actually, if you're engaging with your client properly at a commercial level, you're building that relationship, you're demonstrating that trust, you're helping explain and explore and identify what's the root cause and how can we best support you commercially through that process.
Yeah, so when I think about this whole professional services field fascinates me because it feels really hard to do pricing well. And I say that because when I think about on the value side, we could have value conversations and I could start to learn how much value my customer is receiving, but it's still uncertain. I still don't really know what their value is. And on the other hand, my willingness to accept the amount of time and effort it's going to take me to get him to his solution is also uncertain. Mm-hmm. There's just tons of uncertainty in this whole path. So I'll bet that's really challenging to get partners in firms to be willing to accept that much uncertainty.
I think it is. And I think the other thing that comes back to that is also they are not necessarily commercially minded or business minded. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way. But, obviously they're focusing on the law. So when they're certainly in the legal context, so when they're talking to a client, they're talking about the legalities of what needs to be done. They're not thinking about how does that help my client succeed from a business perspective, because the client has the business problem. They don't have a legal problem. Legal helps resolve it, but the business is the challenge. So one of the things that I've seen work exceptionally well currently is actually changing the nature of the conversation to say, actually, how do we, in whatever area of law or whatever type of professional service that we're doing, add value to our clients? And we're doing that in 3 typical ways. We're doing that in the way that adds value to the client organization itself. So, the Googles or the Bank of Americas or whoever it would be, at that corporate level. And we're doing the things that, people, in other industries are doing. So how can we help improve their revenues? How can we help decrease their costs? How can we mitigate their risks? How can we actually build their brand and reputation? How can we improve their cash flow, particularly important at the moment? So beginning to think about it from a business perspective, saying, how does my approach support that, gives the partners confidence, because now they can say, I understand how I'm helping my client be successful. And maybe the client doesn't understand that, but you can engage the client and say, well, does this look right to you? If we did this, does this help you solve that problem? Does that help you move to the next stage? But we're also helping the client at the individual level. And actually, this is certainly something at the personal professional services area that's really important, because it's the relationship. So how do I help my client or my clients succeed? How do I make them look good? How do I make them be successful in their organization? And how does the way that I deliver my services differentiate me from everybody else? It could be I write in their language. I provide them lots of support or background. I have a great network that I've introduced them to. And then the third area is actually in how do I offer something that's better than the competition, or at least differentiated from the competition, that directly addresses the client's concern. I can have lots of bells and whistles, but if the client doesn't want the bells and whistles, that really doesn't matter. So how can I tailor that for what that client needs? And it's beginning to change the dialogue that way. That is where I think we're seeing the most movement, certainly for law firms, but other professional services firms, by engaging directly with the client, listening to the client, and speaking in the language of business to the client, not the language of their profession.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to say I love number 1 and number 3. I think those two are incredible. Number 2, let's talk about it since I'm a little unclear or uncertain. Mm-hmm. Number 2 was I want the individuals that I'm interacting with to be more successful. Now, obviously that's true, right? Obviously we want to help them. How do I put value on that?
I think it's recognizing that, firstly, people certainly in professional services often underestimate that personal relationship that they have. It's just how they do business. They like working with people they like, and they'll know the clients that they don't want to like. But we often undervalue the impact that that has to the individual. So if that individual is saying, look, I can't conduct training for my team because I just don't have the time, can you conduct training for my team? So they're helping that client, that individual be successful in their department. It could be around, I need to report to my CEO or my board about what I'm doing. Well, it could be, well, I provide you with a monthly report or a weekly report that outlines what we've been doing and how it's adding value to your business. I'm taking the noise and the pain away. I've even heard an example of one from a partner in a firm that I was working for, who actually used to have their client picked up at the airport every time they visited a certain location, take them back to their office and just let them work in the office. But they took all the noise of the travel and the commute away. Now, as you say, that's hard to put a value on, a quantifiable value on, but it has an emotional value. And when that client is looking to choose a firm, they're going to say, well, I'm going to go to my normal providers, and there's going to be a range of providers. Maybe they're $80 up to $150, but they're typically going to choose the one that they like to work with, the one that helps them. And if you're at the 150 end of the scale or the 80 end of the scale, they're going to choose you on that basis. So building that relationship is really quite important, because when it comes to that competitive tender, by the little things that you've done to help them, because they like working with you, because you make their life easier, means you can probably charge a little bit more than you could normally, or you're charging a rate that's fair for the services that you're providing.
Yeah, you know what I love about what you just said is I do a lot of work in subscriptions. And what you just reminded me of, or what that reminded me of, was although I may not have a subscription as a lawyer, what I do have is I have a relationship, an ongoing relationship, where that person is making decision after decision after decision as to which law firm to go to. And as long as I do what subscription companies consider to be customer success, right? I want to make sure my customers are super happy and getting a lot of value, then they're much more likely to stay with us. And that's just a great example of that, even in the non-subscription world.
I think it is. And it comes back to a point that we were talking about earlier on. We talked about procurement jokingly as the dark side, but actually one of the frustrations I think people have had in the professional services is when procurement is brought into the process, rightly or wrongly, it's been perceived as a challenge to that existing relationship. Because procurement don't necessarily understand the relationship, and actually that's not their role. So, I recognize that completely. But the people who are having the discussions feel that they're being threatened and they're being defensive, and they don't understand how to engage with this new entity called procurement, or this, well, it's not so new anymore, but in some areas it maybe still is. And that's where the unease happens. And that's where I think people who have got that pricing background and that professional background can help coach them through those conversations. Say, actually, procurement in this context are also a stakeholder. If we can make their life easier, they're going to help us understand what's important to the client at the organizational level. And it's not going to be a focus on purely give me your cheapest price. It's going to be help me deliver value to my organization. How can you help me do that? And it may cost more, but as long as there's a multiple of value that I get as a client, I'm probably going to choose you. So again, it's recognizing all the different stakeholders that are in this microcosm.
Okay, Stuart, we're going to have a hard time going down this path because I really don't like procurement people. So let me, let's not have this conversation, but I want to express a quick opinion if I may.
Sure.
everything that you said, I think makes a ton of sense, where procurement cares a lot about, are we getting value for the company? Are we getting, if I'm buying a product that's being built into something, is my supply chain accurate? And is it on time? And I'm not getting line down issues. And right. So these guys have a ton of value in that. You take all of that into consideration, and at the very end, they always try to beat you up on price. Right? They will come up with every excuse and story and whatever it is to try to say, oh, your competitors are lower price or something else. And that's the piece of it that really bothers me. Really bothers me. So, but all the other stuff, I'm with you. They add value in a lot of ways.
Just to add what one thing there, because I have maybe come from the procurement side myself. Maybe this is where I'm going to win my friends back. Who knows? But actually, there are probably three types of procurement. And I think that the challenge that many of us have is we see procurement as a big amorphous blob. There's those who are there to purchase a product, the buyer of a service, and actually completely agree. Their main considerations are what lowest cost, because let's be honest, they get remunerated on what they save the business.
Yeah.
It's like anything, you get what you measure. So I think that's one group, and I completely agree with what you're saying, Mark. And I've seen it, and I've probably been there as well when I was maybe less grey hair. The second group are those that live with the consequences. It's the category manager or the sourcing manager. It's the one who not only has a role to play in guiding the stakeholders within the business to make the decision, because bear in mind, procurement don't make the decision.
Right.
They also have to live with the consequence. So they're going to want to choose somebody who's robust, who's good, who's easy to work with, who provides the value add and allows them to be able to look good in their organization, back to one of the points we were before. And there's a third group, and actually I was one of the third group, I confess, and that's the third party consultant. It's the person who's brought in to do a process. And they probably sit in the middle a little bit. The first is focused on cost and savings. The second is focused on value, at least they should be, because they have to be delivering value to their organization and have that ongoing relationship. And the third party hired hand needs to be talking about benefits. So if the benefit is based on I've got a lower price, that's fine. But it could be I've helped deliver additional value to the organization. That's also fine, because again, they typically get remunerated on what they have provided to the business. Yep. So as long as we understand who we're dealing with from a procurement perspective, it could be as simple as looking at their email signature, it allows us to tailor our conversation appropriately. But the points you made are well made, but maybe need to be tweaked a little bit depending on that audience.
I'm with you. And, I feel really horrible about talking about anybody. So,
but I hear you. I hear you.
I've lived on both sides. I've never been procurement, but I've been in a company where I had procurement buy multi-million-dollar products for me. And I've watched that work, and I felt guilty for my vendors.
Yeah.
Right?
And let's be honest, it can work really, really well, and it can also work really, really badly.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I've certainly witnessed in the last 5-6 years in the professional services space is an increasing professionalization of people who are involved in procurement in professional services. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that we get the right answers. It just means they're getting better. They're getting less wrong answers.
Yeah, and the problem is, regardless of how you break up the pie, different people have a small little piece, and they're trying to optimize their little piece, and that just may not be the best answer for the whole company always.
Yeah.
So, and that's not just procurement; that's anybody.
Indeed.
So, all right, unfortunately, we are almost out of time, but let's wrap this up with the ultimate question. What's the one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Don't negotiate in fives.
Don't negotiate in five. What does that mean?
Yeah, don't. So let me just summarize what that means, particularly in professional services, who typically have much higher margins than many other industries. Their margins are typically anywhere between 30% and above. We tend to like round numbers. We like things to end in 5 or 0. We like the 5%, 10%, 15% discounts. By doing that for a law firm, for every 1% additional discount you're giving your client, or a professional services firm, you're typically taking about 3 to 4% of your existing margin. So if you're going from 5% to 10%, you've just reduced your potential margin by anywhere between 15 and 20%, just because you wanted a round number. So don't negotiate in 5s and 0s is my top tip in professional services.
Nice. And I think that's actually a really good negotiation tip anyway. I've never said it as in don't negotiate in 5s. I always say make small steps.
Well, that comes next. That's the next one. And when you do something, it gets smaller and smaller, and concessions are conditional.
Yes.
You know, if I give you, every time you ask me for something, I give you something, you're not going to stop, and you won't necessarily value it. So if I'm giving you something, if you do this for me, I'll do something for you. It's, again, making it conditional on that dialogue. And again, it's these little tweaks and that more commercial view that I think helps build a relationship, because you want your provider in whichever area to be having the right commercial outlook and having that strength of character to push back if something's not right for them.
Yeah. And if you just give discounts away, it makes it hard for the client to believe that you are being honest in the beginning.
Completely.
So
completely. If you give a 50% discount, and I've seen it on things like double glazing windows, you have no faith in the original price of the product.
right.
So be true and have that confidence that what you're delivering is adding value to the client. If you can quantify that, fantastic, but believe in what you're offering and that it has a value.
Excellent. Excellent. Stuart, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Probably just through my email, which is stuart.dodds@positivepricing.com, or on LinkedIn, and they can see my Coursera courses.
Yeah, there we go. And we'll have some links to that in the show notes as well. Episode 69, all done. Let's see, what's my favorite part today? I think I really enjoyed talking about hourly billing versus project billing. I always find that an interesting topic and hard to quantify, or hard to say when it's the right time. What was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments of wherever you downloaded and listened to this. While you're at it, would you please give us a 5-star review? These are extremely valuable to us. Don't forget, we have a free community at community.championsofvalue.com. We publish almost everything that I publish there. Feel free to come join us, join the conversation there. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.